welcome our external auditors from Grant Thornton. It's Matt Derrick this evening, who's joining us on Teams. Please note this meeting is recorded and live streamed live on YouTube. The web link for this is displayed on the agenda for the meeting, which can be found on the Council's website. Thank you. I will now formally open the meeting. Do we have any apologies?
Yes, Chair. Apologies have been received from Councillors Ian Watkinson and Christine Melia.
Thanks, Coral. Declarations of interest. If a committee member has a pecuniary interest, they are requested to leave the meeting completely. The member can rejoin the meeting following the completion of that item in question. Does anyone have any interests to declare? None? Okay, thank you. Minutes of the last meeting. Are there any matters arising from the minutes of the last meeting? Thank you, Councillor Smith.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Would you please add Councillor Phil Smith to the attendance as he was here on the evening? Yep.
Thank you. We'll do that. Can we do that, Paul? Yeah. Okay, in that case, I don't have to sign the minutes on this occasion. Item number 4 on your agenda is the South Ribble Borough Council Audit Plan. Members are advised that this item can be found starting on page 9 of the agenda. I think that's depending which copy of the agenda you have. There are some variations. I now invite external auditors to present this item. I beg your pardon.
Thank you, Chair. I've got a question about the minutes. So it's just a general principle, really. So I know at the last review, Councillor Bretherton was asking about whether there was any trust funds that the council had. Now, what I'd like to say on that is I don't know if that question was answered. It was. Okay. So as a general principle, if I'm taking part in a meeting and a fellow committee member asks a question, I'm then engaged in that question myself. And so could I please ask if it's possible that when a committee member asks a question that can't be answered in the committee and it will be answered subsequently, could I please receive a copy of that answer so that I get the complete story? I'm not sure how my other committee members feel about that, but yeah, I suppose I'm saying as a general principle, can we all please be copied with the answer?
Chris, would you like to comment on that?
Thanks, Chair. Yeah, I think we can change practice to make sure that we circulate responses from an individual councillor's question to all members of the committee.
Thank you, Chris. Okay, South Ribble Borough Council Audit Plan. Matt, over to you, please.
Thank you, Vice Chair. Can I just check you can hear me okay? Yep.
I can hear you fine. Yes, thank you.
Brilliant, thank you. Thank you. So I'm presenting our audit plan for the 2021 financial statements. There's a lot of information in here, so I will just highlight the key areas that I would want to bring to the committee's attention. Starting with the risk assessment, which is page 13 in my agenda pack. The risks we've identified as part of our planning and risk assessment process are broadly similar to prior year. The auditing standards require us to consider whether there's a risk of fraudulent transactions in revenue. There is an option to rebuke this risk if we consider that to be appropriate. And due to the nature of the income the council receives, we feel that is appropriate, and therefore we don't believe this is a significant risk for the council, and we won't be undertaking any specific work in response to that risk other than our normal procedures of auditing revenue. The auditing standards require us to consider the risk of management override of controls. This is a non-reviewable risk, and we will be performing procedures in accordance with the auditing standards, particularly focusing on manual journals posted to the accounts, considering the indication of bias in any accounting estimates, reviewing any changes to accounting policies and any significant or unusual transactions as part of our audit work. Similar to prior years, we've also recognised the valuation of the pension liability as a significant risk, primarily because it is a highly significant and complex estimate, highly material to the accounts and subject to a high degree of uncertainty. Our procedures in response to this risk will be broadly similar to prior years. Grant Thornton ourselves actually also audit the Lancashire Pension Fund, so we'll be liaising with our colleagues who are auditing the pension balances there. and liaising also probably with the actuary used to calculate the balances for the pension fund as well. Over the page, valuation of land and buildings, again, a very significant estimate in the council's financial statements. Land and buildings are extremely prone to revaluation fluctuations from year to year. And in the prior year, there was a material uncertainty disclosed in respect of valuation of land and buildings, primarily due to uncertainty in property markets due to the impacts of COVID-19. Nonetheless, we don't expect that to be the case this year, but the valuation of land and buildings remains a significant estimate in the accounts. We've also recognised an additional risk, which is not a significant risk, but what we call a risk, an area of focus. And this is in relation to issues that have been identified in the past around compliance with controls, particularly around expenditure and payments to suppliers. And because of this, we will particularly focus a kind of an elevated risk assessment on areas of the account that are affected by these issues, namely expenditure and payables. Over the page to page 17 in my pack is a bit of information on the revised accounting standard for accounting estimates. The revised standard requires us to do considerably more risk assessment work at the outset of the audit, and that is to consider the control risk arising around accounting estimates. And what that means is actually looking at the process by which management produces estimates in more detail than was previously required, and considering how management collates data, analyses that data, the actual risk management and quality assurance processes in place to produce those estimates. I think it's the next item on the agenda. We've actually requested some information from management as part of our audit planning work, and those responses, I believe, are in the next agenda item for consideration by the committee. And the reason for that is that we're required to obtain the view of those charged with governance as to the completeness of the information provided by management, and also seek any additional information on risk, particularly around occurrences of fraud and fraud risk at the council, and that'll be explained in the next agenda item. But as a supplement to that, we've also asked for information about how the key estimates in the accounts are produced, and again we're requesting a consideration by the committee as to the completeness and accuracy of the information that's been provided, particularly if there are any other significant estimates in the account that we're not aware of. On page 18, there's a list there of the estimates in the account we've recognised as significant. Just because they're significant doesn't mean they have a significant risk attached, though I must clarify. The valuation of land and buildings and pensions liabilities we consider to have a significant risk. The others are significant estimates, but not associated with a significant risk. I'll just jump ahead to page 21, which explains our materiality for the audit. Materiality is based on gross expenditure. The materiality disclosed here is actually based on the prior year gross expenditure, 1.75% of gross expenditure, which equates to just under 800,000. We've actually received obviously the draft financial statements now, and that's reduced slightly due to the decrease in gross expenditure from year to year, but the proportion obviously remains the same at 1.75%, and that's the level we consider the threshold at which we consider any errors or misstatements to be material to the accounts, i.e. they would influence the users, potentially influence the users' decision making in reading the accounts. Over the page, on page 22 in my pack, value for money, our risk assessment has identified two areas of significant weakness, and these are largely driven by issues that have been identified in the prior year, and there were some statutory recommendations raised in these areas. We still consider these areas to be areas of risk, and our work will be focused around examining the progress that the council's made in addressing those issues, and with our recommendations that have been raised in the prior year as well as undertaking the work required to support the broader scope of value for money audit that's been set by the revised standards issued by the National Audit Office. That's all I wanted to say on the audit plan. Just to confirm as well that our audit has started. We received the draft accounts at the start of July, and our audit is well underway as well now. So happy to report that. Thank you, Chair. Happy to take any questions if there are any.
Thank you very much, Matt. Thank you for the report and for your presentation this evening. I'll now bring this into committee. Are there any members of the committee who have any questions? Councillor Turner.
Thanks, Ben, for the narrative. Very helpful. Yeah, it's just, I just want to pull you back really to page 8, where taking into consideration the timescales this report covers, and the fact that you identified a number of concerns about leadership, culture and adherence to policies and procedures, which included financial procedures not being properly followed. On the other side, there's a sentence there that says, consider whether any of the findings from the investigation work may result in the use of our formal powers. I was just like to understand what that actually means. Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah. So what that means is we'll be looking at the essentially the progress. Sorry, that's not quite as clear as it could be. But looking at the progress that's been made with against the statutory recommendations, particularly around the control environment, and this relates particularly to the compliance with approval processes for payment of creditors, and I think it was raising of purchase orders being exceeded. So what this point captures really is a follow up on the issues that have been identified previously by internal audit and reported on by ourselves as well in the prior year audit, and whether we can essentially close the statutory recommendations that were raised in the prior year or not.
Thank you.
Councillor Ogilvie.
Thank you, Chair. Thanks for that, Matt. Just one quick question on page 22 about value for money arrangements. I noticed the revised approach to it, which, as an ex-chair of this committee, I'm very pleased to see. I always felt that the qualified versus unqualified was an extremely blunt instrument. So if in future there's not going to be a definitive qualified or unqualified, what will you actually be giving to define whether a council is giving value for money or not giving value for money?
Thank you. Yeah, so the form of the opinion is actually unchanged. The opinion will still be kind of as in the sentence itself is kind of written in the same way, but actually it's the judgment around whether value for money is qualified or unqualified is a bit more broad and subjective. We're required to consider a much broader set of criteria, and there's a much more detailed framework than was in place previously for us to consider, and it's really it gives us more scope to consider the balance of risks that we've identified and issues that we've identified informing that opinion, as opposed to the previous scope was very much, as it explains here, a kind of yes or no binary answer as to whether there are value for money issues or not.
Yeah, so just to clarify, you will be issuing a number of opinions or recommendations perhaps, but you won't actually be saying whether they are qualified or unqualified or any other definition that you may wish to make?
Yeah, so we'll issue one opinion. It's a single value for money opinion, but it's supported by a much more detailed report. Our report will cover the three areas highlighted here: financial sustainability, governance, and improving economy efficiency and effectiveness. And we'll provide not an opinion but a conclusion on each of those areas that then support the overall opinion that we provide as well. So it could be that we conclude, for instance, that financial sustainability is the arrangements in place are appropriate and there's no issues to report, whereas that may not be the case with governance, for instance. And then the balance of that we would consider in forming our overall value for money opinion.
Okay, thank you for that.
Thank you. Are there any more questions or notes from people on the committee? None. Are there any questions or comments from people not on committee? No. 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 Okay. So in that case, it's only for noting this one. So we'll note that. And thanks again, Matt, for your contributions this evening. Moving on to item number 5, management responses to the external auditor planning inquiries. Members are advised that this item we found starting on page 33 of the agenda. And could I invite Louise Mattinson to present this item?
Thank you, Chair. So, as Matt has already made reference to in presentation of the earlier item, as part of the audit planning process, the external auditors need to ascertain information around a number of areas, and those are listed in Appendix A to the report. The Appendix A covers the questions that have been asked of us as management and the responses in a variety of areas, such as key events or issues that will have significant impact on the financial statements for 2021. And obviously, COVID plays a big part in that. The appropriateness of accounting policies that we have adopted in the council and the reasons for doing so. Similarly, if there's been any changes in legislation, what our approach has been to incorporating that into the financial information as applicable. Any significant transactions outside the course of normal business, and instances that we are aware of in relation to fraud is covered in there as well. Also, as part of the questions, they have asked for specific information in relation to assumptions that have been made and incorporated into the figures, particularly around plant and equipment, land and buildings, and the valuations associated with them, and the basis of which we've reached the values and incorporated them into the accounts. And similarly on pensions, which is a significant number in the accounts, so how the valuations have taken place in relation to the assets that belong to the pension fund associated with the section which is South Ribble for a council, and similarly the liabilities that attach to that pension fund too, as well as other estimates that we've included in the accounts, such as provisions for bad debts and potential business rates appeals. So the information that's provided there in Appendix A and B, the committee is asked to review and approve the responses to those inquiries, which are then fed through into the report that Matt has just presented.
Thank you, Louise. Thank you for the report. Very easy to follow and understand, and for all the work that's gone into it. So I now bring this to the committee. Can I ask any members who have any questions or comments to make? Councillor Brotherton.
Yeah, thank you. On page 35, it refers to government grants that have been paid out of £27 million. And then further down, it indicates that there is potential evidence of fraud with regards to one small business grant paid for £10,000, and the council is pursuing a refund. I'm just wondering how we're getting on with that, and has the council got that money back? How far are we with the investigation? Thank you.
Okay, I would have to look into that specific one to know what the progress is on that, and I can do that and report back to council. In relation to the business rate grants that were paid out, obviously when the pandemic struck, there was a significant push to get money out to businesses who were severely impacted by COVID as quickly as possible. The advice and guidance that came through from BEIS, the government department that was dealing with these, was to push the grants out as soon as possible, and there were limited checks that took place, but the real push was to get that money out to the businesses. Subsequently, further guidance came in for prepayment and post-payment checks, but by that time, many councils had already made the payments, so we were kind of working on the back foot. We had done a lot of checks, and on a total sum of 27 million, the fact that we found one of 10,000, and even so, the process has not stopped now because there are post-payment checks that will continue, and any that we found that may have been fraudulently claimed and slipped through the net, we will pursue for that recovery. But I will find out the answer to that question.
Any more questions, Councillor Ogilvie?
Thanks, Chair. Yeah, just a quick one on page 38. The question is, what concerns are staff expected to report about fraud? And the response is mandatory fraud awareness training is due to be rolled out to all officers imminently. Well, that doesn't really answer the question, certainly not as far as we as members are concerned. Would it be possible for us to get sight of the training that is given so that we understand which areas of concern you're actually informing officers need to look at?
Yes, that would be possible, yeah.
Councillor Turner?
Thank you. I'm going to make a comment. It's the first comment I've ever made. I normally ask questions. Lots of other people make comments, so I'm going to. I'd just like to applaud the South Borough Council and their team for the fact that in awarding £27 million worth of grants and considering your robust processes of identifying fraud, I want to express to you my what's the word I'm looking for? Appreciation that of the 27 million that you've awarded, only £10,000 has been found to be potentially fraudulent. I think that's a fantastic position to be in, and I do have 100% confidence in your robust procedures. So I'd just like that to be noted. £10,000 is probably nothing in what you've handed out. Thank you.
Thank you very much for that, Councillor, and I'll make sure that is passed on to the team who have worked incredibly hard to ensure those were paid out as quickly as possible within the parameters that were set.
Thank you for that. I'd like that.
Yes, I'd share that sentiment as well. Well, thank you very much. Are there any more questions or comments from members of the committee? Councillor Ogilvie?
Sorry, could I get an answer to my question? Are we able to get sight of?
Yes, sorry, yes, that's absolutely fine.
Yes, I think we did answer it. You might have missed that. Are there any questions or comments from people not on committee? No. Okay, then we have to vote on this one, do we not? Can I ask? Are there any members of the committee that are likely to vote against? None? In that case, we can say this has been approved. Okay, item 6. Treasury Management Annual Report 2020-2021 and June Quarter Monitoring 2021-22. Members are advised that this item can be found starting on page 49, or a couple of pages within it, I think. And again, I invite Louise to present this item. Thank you, Louise.
Chair, could I ask my colleague Tony Ferber, who is responsible for the treasury?
You certainly can. Thank you, Tony.
I'll defer that way.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, Louise. Here we say, 2021 in Treasury Management, as in so much else, has been somewhat of a year like no other. And the key points are summarised in paragraph 4. I don't think there's anything in paragraph 4 or for that matter anywhere else in the report that is likely to come as a surprise. A very, very important factor has been interest rates have been exceptionally low. Now, we seem to have been saying that for 2 or 3 years, and it just seems to keep getting truer and truer. It's hard to see that it can get much more true than it has been for 2021. And cash flow as well has been very different. Usually our cash flow, obviously the absolute amounts will vary, but you can follow the graph year on year and you will see the same shape to it. Well, not in this last year. The patterns have been very unusual. We've had a great deal of money flowing in, tens of millions of pounds, that would not usually have been there, and a great deal of it flowing very quickly back out again. Not all of it. Some of it is there that the council has kept to support its own direct service delivery, and some of it is to be returned to the government at a later date, which we're now coming towards. But the overall result has been that we've had more cash than usual throughout the year. So there's been an average daily balance of over £50 million. But you put that together with the interest rates, and despite the fact that we've had an average balance of over £50 million, the interest earned has been just £177,000, which is 0.36% on average. And there have been actually three reasons for this. One is the very, very obvious one. Interest rates have been exceptionally low. That bank rate has been stuck at 0.1% throughout the whole of the year and is likely to remain there for some time to come. A second factor is because of the unusual cash flows, a great deal of money that was to flow back out to businesses as soon as ever it could be done. That meant that there was a more pressing need than usual to keep money available at very short notice. And then beyond that, a third factor was, even if we were in the mood to place it for slightly longer terms, there was very, very limited opportunity to do so, because of course it's not just this council that's experienced those unusual cash flows, it's every council in the country. So in cash terms, just about everybody has had more than usual, and so nobody has actually been looking to borrow for 3 months, 6 months. So the opportunities have been very, very restricted. So take all of those together, we finish up with our £177,000. Now, I seem to recall sitting, perhaps it was 2 years ago, was it last year, saying that something like 0.89%. I never thought to find myself describing it as a very creditable performance, but the target was for us to achieve 0.1%. So actually, this time around, I have to say 0.36% is itself a very creditable result. Other impacts, if you look to the tables that set out the capital spending and any anticipated rise in the borrowing need, the capital expenditure programme, of course, that has itself been affected, so less money has been spent as a result of that. The programme has been fully financed during the year, so there has been no upward pressure on the underlying borrowing requirement. And overall, that requirement, because we have made the usual statutory provision for repayment, overall, that capital financing requirement described in the report is actually down by a few £100,000. Now, the same pattern has continued into 2021-22. So we are then actually looking at an average daily balance that has crept above 53 million. But once again, I'm afraid I have to say, if we could manage 0.36%, well, from where we're sitting at the moment, we would be very, very pleased with 0.36% for the current financial year. But something I would very much hesitate to promise right now. And really, the final thing to say is simply to confirm that throughout 2021, all of the council's counterparty limits have been adhered to, and all of the prudential indicators have been met. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Tony, and thank you very much for a very informative and detailed report. If you pass our thanks on to the team, we'd appreciate that. So I'll bring this to the committee. Are there any members of the committee who have a question or a comment to make? Councillor Mrs. Smith.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Tony, for your report. It doesn't make particularly happy reading, let's put it that way. And it does seem quite amazing that you only get 176,000 out of 50 million. It's quite staggering, really, when you think about it. And I think the thing that struck me when I read the report, that so many of the people that we normally loan to, the other counterparties, are so few this time. We've only got 3 borough councils where normally we have quite a number, and I presume that's just dried up altogether because of the same scenario you've outlined, that everybody else is cash rich basically at this moment in time, and therefore nobody really wants our money.
That is exactly it. The opportunities available have very seriously dried up, and then of course at the same time, the other side of that same coin is that even more people are chasing what opportunities there are. So yes, we've managed to corner a few, but it's been heavy going.
Okay, any more questions from members? Thank you, Councillor Ogilvie.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, just a couple of quick queries on Appendix A, page 60. I think just in the interest of accuracy, if we look at Highland Council, if I'm reading that right, the money was invested before or after it matured, so I'm guessing that 9th of November should be 20 rather than 21, or 19 rather than 21 for date invested. That's not a big issue. If looking at the notice accounts down below that, just looking for a bit of clarification really what that's all about. They were invested many years ago. There's no maturity date given on them. And the 2 rates of interest are vastly different. I'm just looking for a bit of narrative on the story behind that, really.
Yes, I mean, first of all, yes, clearly on the date, it really should be November 20. On the notice accounts, we did actually have these out at, I think it was 6 months notice for really quite some time. And back in those halcyon days, the interest rates that we were getting on them were competitive with what we could get from the fixed term investments. That has changed, of course, but they do. I think that one of them, the difference is one of them is running at immediate notice. The other was tied in for a time. And so there was a somewhat higher rate of interest from that for a while. But yeah, that was the original reason, yeah, the 6 months notice. So in effect, they were equivalent to the fixed term loans that were being made to other councils. Now, of course, it has, with that dried up, these again are as good an opportunity as any.
Okay. Any more questions from members or comments? No. Any questions or comments from members not on committee? No. Sorry, which moves on to item 7, statement of accounts for the financial year 2020-21. And I think I've got to invite Louise to report again. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. So the report you have in front of you is the draft and unaudited statements for the year 2021, and members are asked to note the content of the report. The audit is underway, and once the audit is completed, that will be brought back to Governance Committee and presented for approval. Just if I could start off by saying it's been a particularly challenging time to pull the accounts together, and I'd just like to say a huge thank you really to the team. My colleague Tony Ferber sat with us here, and particularly Hannah Birchall, who have worked tremendously to get the accounts done on time. The deadline for completion of the draft and unaudited accounts is the 31st of July, but the team were able to produce those by the beginning of July, for the first week of July, in order for the account for the external auditors, Grant Thornton, to begin their work. So it was very difficult, particularly given working under the COVID restrictions and having to work through Teams and email. But nonetheless, they have been produced and are provided here. They are draft and therefore they are subject to change, and that could be change that we find as a council. And indeed, there is a supplementary page that has been added to the agenda and circulated, which is the expenditure and funding analysis. There's just been a slight alteration in the numbers. It will just replace the page that is in the pack that was originally issued. And also, as a result of the audit that's undertaken, it may well be that the auditors find adjustments that they require us to make, and there will be other items that they find that they will just note and bring back to the attention of Governance Committee, but do not require adjustment dependent on the materiality and importance of anything found. So we have a legal obligation to provide a statement of accounts each year, and they must be audited by the external auditors, in our case Grant Thornton, providing that independent review of the financial management and governance of the organisation. And in the audit plan that was presented by Matt earlier, he highlighted those areas that they were going to particularly focus their attention on doing so. The actual statement demonstrates accountability to our stakeholders, to residents, to businesses and to government who fund the services that we provide, and provides some validation and draws out the opinion as to whether the financial statements, that's both the figures included and the notes that support them, and also the narrative, to whether it gives a true and fair picture of the activities that have been undertaken and have been conducted over the course of the year. The detail within the report covers the income and expenditure, so anything earned by the council, grants received by the council and expended in the delivery of services during the year. And also it gives a snapshot position of the assets and liabilities of the organisation as at the 31st of March, and also the position in relation to reserves. The accounts are produced on what's called an accruals basis. So within the figures, we account for all goods and services that have been physically received as at the 31st of March. So we might not have received an invoice, we might not have physically paid out cash in respect of that, but nonetheless, it is an expenditure or an income that relates to the financial year and therefore is included. So I know obviously in advance of the evening we have had a training session to go through an overview and for committee members to consider the contents, and so rather than repeat some of that, I will happy to take any questions, and my colleague Tony, who is our technical expert, will assist too.
Thank you, Louise. A very detailed report, and thank you for the training session we all enjoyed earlier. All I can say is I'm glad I'm not an accountant, but I do understand it a little bit better than I did before I arrived. And with that, I would bring it into committee and ask, are there any members of the committee would like to ask a question or make a comment? Councillor Ogilvie.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, just one. My brain still hurts from the training exercise. I'm looking at cash flow statement on page 133, and I'm just looking at the deltas between the 1920 position and the 2021 position, and the biggest delta appears to be financing activities, which has gone from I think it's a plus 9.6 to a minus 18.1. It's explained in note 28. I've looked at note 28 and I'd appreciate just a little more clarification on what the reason for the big delta is.
There are two reasons. One is it comes back to our £10 million of temporary borrowing that was held at the 31st of March 2020 and then subsequently repaid. So that produced a £10 million inflow in 1 year and a £10 million outflow in the following year. So there straight off is a £20 million variation between the years. And then the other figure at the bottom now, again, referring back to the training, we did touch on some unusual happenings in the collection fund during the year. And whereas that number at the bottom would usually be a relatively minor number, what appears as £35,000, the way things have been working in the collection fund, that has become several millions. And that again, it's not exactly the same thing as we were looking at before, where there is a massive deficit that has appeared in the collection fund, but it's related to it. So rather than business rates income coming in, we have had grant monies coming in.
Okay, thank you.
Councillor Bretherton.
Hi, thank you. It's related to page 91 or page 177. It's 26C, interest received and interest paid. I can understand the interest received has fallen because of the reduction in Bank of England base rates. The interest paid, I'm quite curious as to what that's about, and I'm assuming it's something to do with a temporary £10 million borrowing. Is that an actual interest we've paid on that loan?
That is an element within it. Let's see, the difference is what? It's about £26,000. And for full detail, I would have to go away and look up the answer. It's it could be to do with a leasing figure as well. So, but I won't prejudge that. I can get the full answer.
Okay, thank you.
That's okay, Councillor Bretherton, is it?
Well, yes, I was just curious as to what interest we were paying, but if it's something to do with leases, it'd be good to clarify that if you can do. Thank you.
I stand open to correction on that one. I would emphasise, but it's yeah.
Okay, thank you. Any more questions from or comments from members of the committee? None. In that case, are there any questions or comments from people not on the committee? Nothing, I can see nothing there. In that case, this is only to note, so again, no vote is required, and I think that was the final item of the agenda. I'd like to thank Grant Thornton, the officers and members for attending and their reports. Thanks to members for their attendance and contributions. And with that, I will close the meeting. Thank you.